My name is Dr. Julio Friedman. I'm here at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. My title is Senior Advisor for Energy Innovation.
Could you mention and describe the current sources of primary energy globally in the United States and how coal would fit into that picture?
85% of primary energy in the world comes from fossil fuels: coal, petroleum, natural gas. Until recently, oil was the number one primary energy source. And very recently, it was overtaken worldwide by coal. The other 15% come from hydropower, nuclear power, biomass, wind, solar, and geothermal. The renewables that most people think of, wind, solar, represent worldwide only a small fraction, a couple of percent of the primary energy.
Coal being so now the number one source, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages that go along with using coal?
Coal has been an incumbent for a long time for a good reason. There are lots of advantages to the burning of coal. It has a very high energy density, meaning you get a lot of energy out of it. A box about this big has about 100 kilowatts energy in it. You can make a lot of power with that kind of coal. It's easy to transport, it's safe, it's stable, and it's cheap. This is why the Industrial Revolution, why the modern world has been built on coal. It has some very substantial disadvantages. The practice of mining is disruptive. Pollution in the form of sulfur, nitrous oxides, mercury, heavy metals, and now carbon pollution, carbon dioxide, which is a very serious challenge to manage. In addition to that, there are other problems like ash ponds, wastes from the mining. All of these things need to be dealt with for real.
And I'm going to mention some other sources of energy, and once again, if you mention the pros and cons of using them. So we would talk about coal. How about natural gas?
Natural gas today is the go-to fuel, increasingly so. We're seeing natural gas ascendant for the same reasons. It's cheap, it's abundant, it's broadly distributed, it's easy to transport in a global market through pipelines and liquefaction and all those other things. In addition to that, it burns much more cleanly. It has less carbon dioxide, typically no sulfur, no ash, no mercury, no heavy metals. So it looks much more clean as a primary source of energy.
So what's the pro of using oil and the cons of using oil?
There's a reason why oil has been the number one fuel in the world for a long, long time. Again, it's easy to transport. The energy density is high. I used to run this experiment in classes I taught. I would say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $3 and you can push my car for 30 miles. What do you think? It's really cheap. The value of oil is much higher than the price of oil. And so even at $4 a gallon, even at $1,000 a ton, oil remains a very, very valuable fuel. Because you can put it in a car, or you can put it in a plane, or you can put it in a boat, it is the workhorse for mobile platforms. Right now, oil connects our world. It makes the global economy possible because of its energy density, because of its fungibility, because of its ease of access in its incumbent distribution network. We have not yet found anything that can challenge that system and its incumbency on its value proposition. Biofuels aren't there yet. They may someday be, but they're not in terms of cost, in terms of availability, in terms of scale. Electric vehicles are coming online. Those are going to matter for some systems like light transport, light duty transport. But again, they have their challenges too. And of course, the big downsides for oil are pretty transparent. Emissions, greenhouse gas emissions chiefly. The geopolitics associated with oil have complexities and costs that are very real. And there's volatility in the price, which makes it hard for people to plan and think about how they enter the world.
How about hydro, pros and cons?
Hydropower remains the thing that you do when you've got it. If you have a hydro resource, you want to take advantage of it. It is very low cost. The environmental impacts are localized but small. On the downside, you sometimes displace people, as was happening in the Three Gorges. There are environmental impacts on the forms of trouts and salmon and streams and so forth. But overall, it does not emit. It can be dispatched whenever you want it, and the energy density and quality is very high.
How about nuclear?
Nuclear power remains an important source of clean energy in the world. There are no emissions from the use of nuclear power. No carbon, no sulfur, no particulates, nothing. It has the highest of all energy densities. Again, it is relatively low cost in terms of fuel. It is relatively widespread worldwide. The challenges with nuclear are the capital costs of running and building a nuclear plant are very high, and that makes the price increasingly hard to compete. In addition, there are issues of non-proliferation, of safety, of waste, which remain challenges to the industry as a whole. In the United States, the costs associated with that have gone up, in part because the people have broadly felt they want to know that those are managed and managed well. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, FERC, other groups have asked for more to be done in terms of safety and waste management and so forth, and that has actually over time increased costs.
Okay, wind energy.
Wind energy is really come into its own in the past couple of years. It is a very good resource where you've got it. In places where the wind blows a lot, you want to take advantage of that for real. The costs of wind energy have dropped dramatically over the past 20 years, and in many places, wind is now competitive for power generation with any other clean energy supply. It is domestic and secure. The job base that comes with that is very attractive. And of course, there's no pollution, there's no emissions of any kind associated with wind power, and the fuel costs are zero.
Solar.
Like wind, solar is broadly distributed. Where you've got a good resource, you want to take advantage of that. Again, the fuel costs are free. The water you need to run it is zero, all these other sorts of things. Increasingly, the cost of solar has also come down dramatically. People like the fact that they can put it on their roofs and have some control over it. People like the fact that it's distributed as an energy system. Again, where you've got a good resource, at utility scale, at community scale, the costs are competitive with many, many other kinds of energy technologies. The challenge with solar and with wind is they are intermittent. When the wind isn't blowing, when the sun is down, you don't have that power. And the intermittency can be quite dramatic. You can lose 80% of your solar in just a matter of minutes. It can come back in a matter of minutes too, but that creates challenges to the grid. In addition to that, that intermittency means that you have to back those energy systems up with other kinds of energy, often nuclear, gas, coal, some other kind of clean energy supply.
Biomass.
Biomass remains challenging. In the power sector, biomass is hard to manage because you have to harvest it and bring it to a central plant. That limits its effectiveness as a renewable fuel. There's a lot of controversy now about whether or not it's actually carbon negative and under what contexts. In addition to that, the costs of running a biomass plant are quite high. Compared to wind or solar, the costs are pretty dramatic. Even in places where you have readily available waste biomass, it is often not competitive as a function of cost or availability.
When we're talking about renewable technologies for electricity purposes, how can these renewables share the burden of providing energy for people?
Because renewable costs have dropped so dramatically, because their performance has improved, because grid operators have gotten better about managing that intermittency, increasingly renewables have an important role in energy provision in this country, specifically power. To generate electrons, wind and solar are doing more and more of the work. In parts of the country, 30%, even 40% of the load carried any given day may be renewable power. That's great from energy security perspective, from an emissions perspective, from all these other things. The challenge is that on an hourly basis or on a seasonal basis, sometimes that energy isn't there. So they do need to share the grid with other kinds of energy, with natural gas, with coal, with nuclear, with hydro. As we load more and more renewables onto the grid, we are finding ourselves dealing with issues of managing that intermittency. Fossil energy has some benefits in that you can dispatch it when you want to, and that can handle that intermittency. Many technologies are making this easier to do. Smart grid technology for sure, demand response technology for sure, storage maybe someday. In the near term though, we still need these systems. A concern with loading more renewables on the grid is if we force them to dispatch when they dispatch, that creates negative markets. That makes it uneconomic for companies to generate power. That's true for nuclear generators which don't emit, or fossil energy generators that do. The markets are really struggling with that. The markets are trying to figure out how to manage these competing needs. And it's not easy to do so. In general, a more diverse energy system is a more resilient one. If you have power outages, if you have gas pipeline failures, a more diverse system helps you manage these kinds of challenges. It also manages price shocks, having a more diverse system. It's important to note that a more diverse system is one that we're working towards. One that has more wind, that has more solar, that has more gas, but also has coal and nuclear and hydro. That's the hallmark of a diverse power system. And I'm pleased to say we have that in the United States today. The United States is so blessed in its diversity of energy resources that we have a much broader primary energy mix than many other countries. Because we have abundant coal, oil, and gas, because we have abundant wind and solar, because we have decent geothermal, because we have a good transmission infrastructure, all of these things have given us a pretty wide range of energy supplies. In other countries, it's simply not that way. In France, it's 70% nuclear energy for their power production. In Japan, it is very heavy on nuclear, on coal, and on gas. And following Fukushima Daiichi and the shutdown of nuclear plants, they had very serious power generation challenges. In China, the primary energy mix is overwhelmingly coal as a component of fossil. As these countries seek to diversify their energy mixes, they look to the United States with a certain amount of interest and envy, with the idea that they would have a system as diverse and as resilient.
How about our infrastructure? The infrastructure, you mentioned the grid. Is that something we need to address? Do we need to upgrade the infrastructure?
We can't hit our economic goals and we can't hit our climate and environmental goals without putting more money into infrastructure. And that is infrastructure of all kinds. The Quadrennial Energy Review that the DOE put out recently makes that point strongly. That includes transmission infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure, navigable seaways and ports. All of these are critical infrastructure. And if we don't start putting money into those things, we will be building a system which is not resilient, which is not clean, and which is increasingly costly.
Let's talk about an extreme. What would happen if we stopped using coal for producing electricity?
Last year in this country, coal produced 40% of the megawatt hours used. That's a lot of energy. If we stopped today to zero, there would be real consequences with that. We could make up some of that by increasing our use with natural gas on existing plants. We could quickly build more natural gas plants as well. But it would be challenging to zero out coal in a short amount of time. That said, we are seeing that gas, wind, and solar are cutting into coal's market share. And increasingly, coal shares will diminish over the next few years.
As the use of coal goes down, will the cost of power go up?
It's hard to know if the cost of power will go up as coal's share goes down. Today, coal as a fuel is very, very cheap, and the plants are already built. But low-cost natural gas has really become strong competition for coal. And in many places where coal has been shut down and replaced with wind and solar and gas, the prices have not gone up. In some places, those costs have gone down. But it won't work everywhere. In parts of the country, if you shut down the coal plant, the price will go up.
How about emissions? Let's say we were able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the state of our carbon emissions?
If we were to zero out coal use today, that accounts for a very large fraction of our fossil energy emissions, of our carbon emissions. That's about 25% of the US emissions today is just from the coal fleet. Some of that would be replaced by gas. So we might reduce a total of 15% emissions. From the power sector, we would reduce more. From the power sector, we'd have dramatic reductions. But from industrial use, from transportation, from residential and commercial use, those energy systems don't use coal. So even if we zeroed out coal from the power sector, we would still have a very large emissions burden to manage.
Let's talk about India and China. Why don't you tell us what they use for their electrical generation and why?
Today, China produces about 68% of its primary energy from coal, most of that for power, but also for industry. It uses coal as a feedstock to petrochemicals, to district heating, to fertilizer production, to cement production, to steel production. Those heavy industries use an enormous amount of coal. They use coal for the same reason many people do. It's cheap, it's abundant in their country, and it's a secure domestic resource. That gives them advantage in a global market. As a consequence, though, they are now facing the kind of environmental challenges which the developed world faced a century ago, associated with acid rain, with pollution, with smog, with water issues, and they are grappling with those issues for real.
You mentioned percentage for China. What would be the percentages for India?
India is also very high. About 80% of Indian power is generated by coal. A lot by nuclear, a lot by hydro, but coal is still the go-to. Right now, the government of India plans to continue to build coal plants, even as they have committed to immense solar build-outs that will help their country dramatically. But in order to deal with their issues of energy poverty and energy security, they will continue to build coal plants in India for years to come.
China and India are building conventional power plants, coal-fired power plants, not new generation ones. What effect will that have for generations to come when we talk about, trying to improve the environment?
China is actually building extremely sophisticated coal plants. Their fleet as a whole has a better efficiency than the United States fleet, and the new plants they have are the most efficient in the world. They have also become very proactive on managing conventional pollution from those plants. Many coal plants built in China today have less sulfur and mercury and NOx emissions than a natural gas plant, and they've really committed to that. They have high efficiency because they're ultra supercritical. They're using very modern designs, and they're investing in science and technology to make them even more efficient. The challenge is that doesn't help the carbon story very much. They will continue to emit very large volumes of carbon dioxide, even with the higher efficiency. The volumes are large, the rates are large, and this is a persistent challenge that China understands they need to meet. In many parts of the world, notably in China and India, it is still rare to control the pollution from coal-fired generation. That has very serious health consequences. In China, for almost 10 years now, the government has publicly said that they lose 11% of their GDP to respiratory problems like asthma. There's mercury toxicity. There's ash and breathing problems. It's getting worse in China, and it's getting worse in India. In order for them to reap the benefits of a fossil energy economy, they simply must control their pollution. This is known to these governments. They understand that. But often achieving that goal is difficult to do. And it's not a question of cost, it's a question of actuation. How do they go about doing it with their system?
Is there anything that the rest of the developed world could do to help India and China?
There's a handful of things which would matter with respect to reducing their dependence on coal or improving their emissions performance in their coal-based economies. Honestly, part of that is to improve their financing, to make it easier for them to invest in the latest, best technologies so that they don't build yesterday's coal plants, they at least build today's coal plants. Second, they should continue to commit to efficiency of the fleet and to end-use efficiency and demand destruction. China has gone very far in that direction. India is now starting on reforms that will lead to efficiencies in their fleet and inefficiencies in their economy. That will help a great deal. Third, they need to continue to invest in renewable power, as they have. China has now installed more solar and wind than any other country in the world. India has made these dramatic commitments to solar power, and they have a great solar resource. But at the end of the day, we need to find ways to manage the carbon dioxide of the existing fleet. We should help them, at their invitation, to seek ways to capture and store the carbon dioxide those plants are emitting, or ideally use that carbon dioxide to some beneficial goal.
When we talk about CCS, carbon capture and storage, what is the state of that in the world today, or U.S. today and in the world today?
Many people don't understand how advanced carbon capture and storage technology is. For example, most people don't know that we have been capturing carbon dioxide since 1938. We've been putting it underground since 1972, and today there are 15 plants operating in the world capturing about 22 million tons of carbon dioxide and storing it indefinitely, safely, and well. There are coal-fired power plants we have retrofit to zero out their carbon dioxide emissions. One in Canada, one in the United States. The one in Canada is operating. The one in the United States is going to turn on in 2017. And we have been able to do so safely, effectively, and at reasonable cost. Most people don't know this. Most people think that carbon capture and storage is a future technology. It's not. It's a present technology that we understand pretty well.
But how practical is it to retrofit plants like that?
The question of practicality hinges on two issues. The first issue is just, can you do it at that spot? Is the plant too old? Do you have the space to do it, or the water cooling to do it? Will you ever make your money back in a reasonable market? These are questions that need to be answered on a plant-by-plant basis. Not all plants will be suited for CCS retrofits, period, guaranteed. The other question is really, compared to what? If you're in a state like California that has great wind and solar and geothermal resources, you might not want to do that for a coal plant or a natural gas plant here. But if you're in a state like Indiana, 92% coal power for electricity, a good geological storage resource, not great wind and not great solar resources, it may be the best solution in that market. In some markets, like in Saskatchewan, where the Canadian project is running, that was the market solution that worked best for them. People have done assessments as to whether or not you could retrofit portions of the fleet. In the United States, a third of the plants will probably just shut down. A third of the plants are viable for retrofit, and a third of the plants are on the bubble. Out of the third that's viable for retrofit, we probably won't retrofit all of them. Part of the reason why is because they just might not be competitive, even if we did. Part of them we probably won't retrofit because today there's no policy to support it. There's investment tax credits and production tax credits for wind and solar and other kinds of clean energy. Carbon capture and storage doesn't have access to those market mechanisms. But some of the plants will be retrofit, and that will be good for America.
Is part of the whole thing about coal-fired power plants location, I mean, you had mentioned location, but even starting when they decide to build a power plant, you need to be near the coal, you need to be near water, you need to you need a number of factors. So maybe if you could just mention that.
Today we build coal-fired power plants and many natural gas-fired power plants. We operate nuclear power plants largely as a function of where there is water. You need water for cooling, and if you don't have water, you can't run the plant. After that, you put them near railroads or barges. Turns out a lot of plants are on rivers because that way they can get their fuel and that way they can get their water. Increasingly, they don't have to be near coal to be built or operated because until recently, half of the rail transport in this country was shipping coal. You can take coal from Wyoming or from Illinois or from West Virginia or from North Dakota, bring it to wherever the plant is. And that is incorporated in the cost of running the plant.
Where are the major sources of coal in the U.S.?
It turns out the United States has an enormous coal resource that's broadly distributed. We have coal in the South, in Alabama, in Texas. We have coal in Appalachia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. We have coal in the West, in Colorado, in New Mexico, in Montana, and in Wyoming. We even have coal in California, even though we don't use it. That abundance, that geographical diversity is part of what makes coal attractive to so many operators and to so many countries. The largest coal reserves in the world are in Russia, the United States, China, and India. Not surprisingly, those are the countries that burn the most coal.
What is the role of technology in addressing our energy and climate conditions and problems?
Today, we have all the technologies we need to solve issues of energy resilience, sustainability, climate, and affordability. The challenge is if we use what we have today, it will cost more than we'd like. It just will. The role of technology fills two gaps. The first one is the financial gap. How do we get the costs down enough that it makes it easier for financiers and policymakers to say yes? And that's why you need a lot of research and development to keep that going. Our ascendancy as a country and our dominance as an energy power is built on advanced technology, including solar, wind, natural gas, and coal. The other thing we use the technology for is to open up vistas we have not seen before. Technology development, for example, in battery technology is one place where we're going to see electrification of vehicles, which will challenge the incumbency of petroleum. That's very important. It changes the way that people think about their lives and the way they think about cars, the way they think about mobility and energy security. And technology makes that possible. Someday we may harness high altitude winds. That's only possible through investments in technology development and sustained investments that lead us to market. If it stays on the bench, it has no value. Energy technology only has value when it enters the marketplace.
How would you describe or tell us what's meant by advanced power generating systems?
There's a reason we burn rocks for most of our energy today. In order to make them better, you just got to change the way we do that. If there are places we can't use wind, if there are places we can't use solar, if there are places we can't use nuclear, we need advanced power systems to do the work. Natural gas turbines were a good invention. That's helped a lot. But a coal boiler, we can do better than that. Now we are looking at systems in which we gasify coal. We're looking at systems in which we don't burn anything, in which we just cycle oxides, something called chemical looping. We're looking at systems in which the coal isn't burned, instead it's detonated and you get pressure gains associated with that. We're looking at systems in which the coal is transformed into a plasma. Many of these systems won't be commercially competitive, but some of them will, and some of them will really matter in terms of getting the cost down. The one I think is coming online fast is using supercritical cycles. And here what we're talking about is instead of using steam as the fluid. Instead, you're using CO2 as the working fluid. And here, the supercritical CO2 has unique properties that water or air don't have. It's a great heat exchanger, and it's a small footprint. So you can make a coal plant with a supercritical CO2 cycle or a gas plant with a supercritical CO2 cycle that is smaller, that is net water positive, and that is very, very efficient. If we're going to keep using fossil fuels into the future, we need systems like that to manage all of the environmental issues that are so pressing and so real.
Where would the CO2 come from?
To start that system, you can just buy the CO2. Ultimately, the way those systems work is a small fraction of the CO2 is recycled, but most of the CO2 would need to be stored or used. We know we can no longer continue to emit this as a world. We've placed our world in jeopardy through the continued uncontrolled emissions of carbon dioxide. Ultimately, systems like that will make the costs equivalent to today's systems. In that case, we can ultimately have the best of all worlds. We can have the reliability and the cleanliness of renewable power. We can have the reliability and cost comparisons and dispatchability of other fossil systems, but without the environmental impacts. If you embrace the science of climate change, you have to embrace the math of climate change too. It makes it hard to hit a 2-degree budget, or much less a 1.5-degree budget, without really managing the carbon directly. Advanced power systems, advanced capture and storage systems will make the cost of that go down and the performance of that go up. And we know that we need to do that work as well as efficiency, as well as renewables. It's just part of the work to do.
Okay, can you tell us about the Clean Power Plan?
The Clean Power Plan came out of a recognition by the judiciary, by the executive branch, and by the United States Congress that the EPA had the right to regulate carbon dioxide. Based on that, they went to the Clean Air Act and said, how are we going to do this? What came out was the Clean Power Plan. And the Clean Power Plan says that in order to do this, they're going to create targets for states and standards for generation. And that's very similar to the way that the Clean Air Act has operated in the past.
So why don't you tell us about the relationship between energy and the quality of our life?
For many, many years, economists, demographers, ethnologists of all kinds have known that the quality of life goes up with energy use. There is a point beyond which you don't get a whole lot more quality of life, but in point of fact, most people do associate energy access and use with quality of life, whether that's mobility in cars, whether that's access to your iPhone and computers, whether that's going to see a movie. These things are built on energy. Same thing with hospitals. Hospitals run on energy. Our healthcare system is powered by energy. Same thing with our military and our defenses. Same thing with our emergency response. All of the aspects of the global world and our way of life in any given country that we take for granted are undergirded by high quality, low cost energy.
How about energy security and why it's important for us to have sources of energy inside the United States?
Each country thinks about energy security differently. The United States thinks about it differently than China does, and thinks about it differently than Russia does. Ultimately, though, in the United States, you want to have secure domestic supply. You know that you want especially liquid fuels, and a source of liquid fuels which you can control. I think it's marvelous that now the United States is the largest producer of oil and gas of any country in the world. That has changed our energy security posture for real. The fact that we are harnessing more wind and solar power has made it that much easier for us to think about energy independence in the way that we enter the world. In that context, our access to coal, our access to gas affect our energy posture. Japan, as one example, or Singapore as another, do not have that luxury. They have to think about their sources of energy in a globally competitive market and economy. They have to think about supply chains. They have to think about their partners, and it affects the way they enter the world.
Why don't we talk about your vision of coal and the use of coal in the future?
We know that we cannot continue to use coal today the way we have in the past. If coal is going to have a viable energy future, it must do so without contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. It must. If coal and if natural gas cannot trend towards zero in their emissions, they will not have a big market share in any country. That's one of the conclusions of Paris, and it's certainly the math of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So, right now, we're at a crossroads in which we will either make the investments to zero out the fossil power emissions for coal and gas generation, where we will think of ways to use carbon dioxide to turn it into useful products, or we will get on with the business of placing CO2 safely underground indefinitely, or in which we'll roll up that carpet and say goodbye. The services that fossil energy provide can be met with other sources. Today, at higher cost, at greater risk. If we take coal and gas off the table, we'll be buying into that cost and risk. But we must zero out the emissions over the next few decades, because I want my children to grow up in a world with coral reefs and polar bears. And if we don't do that, they won't.
If you had unlimited money, could you reduce those numbers in natural gas and coal down to zero? Is that feasible?
We don't need unlimited money to zero out those emissions. Today, the cost of doing carbon capture and storage as a retrofit in existing markets is cost competitive with everything. It's cost competitive with nuclear, with solar, with wind, and with hydro in a bunch of markets. What we need to spend some money. We need to open up the markets to make policies that support clean energy of all kinds. We want to finance wind plants, we want to finance solar plants, and we want to finance clean fossil plants. And clean means near zero emissions, period. And if we don't do that, we're placing our planet at risk.
Why don't we have that resolved? What's the stumbling block?
Part of the challenge of getting there is there are plenty of people who just don't like fossil fuels, and they have grounds not to like them. That's a challenge that's real. Part of the challenge is people don't know what CCS is. They know what a windmill is, they know what a solar panel is, they know what a nuclear plant is, they know what a gas turbine is, they know what a battery is, but they don't know what CCS is. That's a failure of our community to carry that message. Part of the challenge is just narrative. It's hard to explain to people why this is important. It takes time and sophistication, and we haven't messaged very well. Part of the work that's required is to do a better job of communicating why it's required, why it's feasible, why it's competitive, and why it's beneficial. Most people are surprised when they learn that the United States has successfully reduced criteria pollutants from power generation by roughly 90%. People still have this picture in their mind of a Dickensian coal plant belching pollution into the air. For many, many years, people didn't realize that there was a big coal plant in the center of Washington, D.C. that was providing power generation at the Capitol and other places. Now that's powered by natural gas. But part of the reason they did not know that is we have done a very good job in the OECD and developed countries of managing criteria pollutants like sulfur, like nitrogen, like mercury, like ash, like particulates. We've done a good job of that. Now we face the next challenge, which is carbon. That one will be much, much harder.
North Dakota, we are constantly, our politicians are constantly battling the EPA over new rules and regulations related to coal because they see it as a threat to the industry. But how do you get around that? I mean, how do you overcome that an initial, it's going to hurt my pocket right here, right now, today?
Ultimately, to make progress, we need to get past the gridlock. It is not helpful to go back and forth between policymakers in a state like North Dakota and the EPA suing each other, challenging each other. We need to propose pathways that are better. If politicians dislike the Clean Power Plan, and there are many that do, and they have their reasons, I would hope they would be proactive in proposing something different, something that works better for their states and their economies, so that they can serve their constituencies while tackling the tough problem of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Back and forth, suing each other, the constant fighting doesn't solve the problems of anybody. We have to elevate above that and seek new pathways and solutions that work for more people.
How do you feel? How confident are you that we as a country, we as a planet are going to overcome these obstacles?
I have good days and bad days. There's some days I really believe we're going to get there. We're going to learn how to play nice, we'll roll up our sleeves, and we'll do the work. I'm optimistic about technology and what it can deliver. Then I have bad days. I have bad days where it seems like we're stuck in an endless Dilbert cartoon where we simply can't listen to each other and we simply can't be creative. Will we get there or not? Hard to see. But I know that myself and a great number of people around the world are working very hard to make sure that we do succeed.